Welcome everybody to the show, Dara Poker. That's right, folks. I've been working on that for a solid 20 minutes. That's all I've been doing in preparation for this podcast. Dara, you are a man who has been around the game for a long time, a poker coach, a podcast host, a writer of books, an expert in many things poker, a commentator, and still actually a poker player, which I think sometimes people cease to be once they start becoming a coach and other things. I very much appreciate you taking the time. When we were trying to schedule this, Dara's out there on that live grind now that live poker is back. He is busy, busy, busy. So thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show.
My pleasure, Sarah. Always a pleasure to talk to you. You mentioned there that I've been playing poker for a long time. I think because of my age, most people think I probably started around the same time as Doyle. But the reality is I was actually already very old when I started. I didn't learn poker until I was 42. So I haven't been playing as long as people think. But yeah, it's still quite a long time.
I love that, though. That's so interesting. My mom was just in town a couple weeks ago, and she was talking about how so many people sort of just give up at some point, basically, on learning new things, doing new things, trying new things. And it's so crazy because my grandmother was also here when my mom was here, who's 90 something years old. I see her going deep into her hundreds, no problems. And it's like, we're talking about another 50 years here, folks, maybe more. So we've got to make sure to fill this in with some fun, interesting stuff. And actually there's a little sector of the poker community which is growing a little bit, at least in terms of content. We can see now, unless people are lying, which they are a lot of the time, but we can see how the demographics are shifting in terms of who's tuning into our content. And that is something I actually wanted to ask you about, because we've seen the last few years have been really unprecedented in a lot of ways in poker. And one of them is that we've seen a lot more people that we never expected join the online space, I think, as a result of COVID. And a lot of these people, it turns out, were in an age bracket we didn't expect to see. But let's talk a little bit about what COVID has sort of done for you, for your life, how things changed for you. And then as we've shifted now back to the live poker scene, how dramatically life has changed.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess in the last few years of my career, what essentially happened is I've always done stuff other than just play, but the other stuff expanded to be larger and larger. So just before COVID, I was traveling a lot for live poker. I was playing online poker, and I was doing all the other stuff that I was doing. Once with COVID and lockdown in Ireland was one of the more severe ones, it basically meant I didn't leave my house for 18 months. So live poker disappeared completely. And all the other stuff that I did that required me to leave the house disappeared as well. But everything else pretty much stayed the same. So I played more online. I did more coaching. I did all the other stuff that I normally do. And to go back to your point about the older demographic, it's been a constant annoyance to me since I came into poker, actually, just how badly online poker in particular markets to older people. I think the live operators do a much better job at this, trying to attract older people to their events, the seniors, the super seniors at the WSOP and other events, for example. That's a good way of getting people in. But online has always done a really bad job. It's like they think the only people that matter are 18 to 22-year-old males, and that's the demographic that they're very much aimed at. And they pay some lip service to getting more women into the game, but really they don't do that much either. And they certainly don't go after the older demographic. And when you talk to a lot of older people, or at least when you did years ago, they were very suspicious of online poker because, the full tilt, for example, younger people tend to be motivated more by sort of, glory, trying to build their career, et cetera, not so much worried about the security of their money, which is more of a concern to the older demographic. They're not willing to put thousands of pounds on a site that might disappear tomorrow. So all of those scandals really affected how hard it was to get older people to play. And then all of the marketing was just really a turn off. The message sort of was, poker is a young man's game. Everybody else should just stay away. And it was very hard to get older people playing as a result. Now, enter the pandemic, and a lot of the guys that I coach are actually older players, but they only ever played exclusively live. For all the reasons I just gave, they were suspicious of online, but now they couldn't play live either. So I always encourage them to play online. I used to tell them, at least play a little bit online because it'll improve your live game. But then when live disappeared, it was a case of, well, now if you want to keep playing, you're going to have to play online for a while. And I think the operators did, to be fair, respond reasonably well. Initially, they mismanaged the pandemic in the sense that they just thought, okay, now we can get everybody to play the big 55 every night. And that didn't really appeal to the recreational players. They like events, live poker is always based around festivals, the WSOP, the Irish Open, Unibet Opens, etc. And you get people excited for an event that comes along every couple of months. So all of those events moved online, and that was a much better marketing plan to try and get older people to play. And I was just stunned by how many of my older students not only started playing online, but actually really enjoyed it. And I think there's going to be a long-term beneficial effect for that, even though live poker has come back now, and obviously everybody's dying to play live poker again. The older people, they've sort of lost this idea of that online is not for them, and they realize you can actually do both, and they can both be fun. And so for me personally as well, it's similar. Like, I always thought I didn't really like live poker that much. Online poker was my thing. I like meeting people at live events, but when you're used to playing 12 tables at a time online, and on average on each table you're going to play 2 or 3 times as many hands as a live table, live can feel really slow and boring, where you're playing 20-25 hands an hour if you're lucky. But I was surprised how much I missed live. And when live poker came back, I was definitely also in the category of really, really wanting to play again. So as you mentioned, when we were scheduling this, I was running around playing everything I could with this.
It's interesting because the two really, they should have a mutually symbiotic relationship. For anyone who loves poker, you can love poker, in either space, and wherever we can capture an audience, I think we should be aggressively pursuing doing as such. And actually, that brings us to, if we're going to at least be on sort of topic with what's happening right now, it is also an interesting space. There have been plenty of great scandals, as you mentioned, Full Tilt being one of them in the poker space. And I think right now there's also a lot of conversation about game integrity and security. And actually, I have to say, for my own self, if I'm honest, I think I've been very naive, which normally I think I'm pretty cynical, but I had a very big trust in a certain element of the poker space that I just saw as a lot of people of great integrity and who had lots of money. And I thought, probably because they're people of great integrity and these things. And I'm not saying one way or the other. I don't know all of the facts of any of the situations that have recently come to light, but I'm curious your thoughts. And do you think this is something that's sort of going to be relegated to the high stakes world? Or do you think that the sort of current controversy and scandal can have an impact on people's desire to jump into specifically online poker?
Yeah, I think it absolutely will. I was involved in the running world for years. And one of the things which used to annoy me about the running world was, to my mind, athletics makes they're much more rigorous in their efforts to catch drug cheats than any other sport. Well, almost any other sport. There are some other sports that are good too, but they really, really do try, and they catch a lot of drug cheats as a result. And more often than not, the reaction of people is not, oh, great, they caught another cheat, that's one less cheat in the sport. It was a case of like, oh, they're catching so many cheats, they must all be doing athletics is just rotten. Every top class athlete must be a cheat. And my worry about this stuff is that while it's great that we're catching all these cheats, and we absolutely want to do that, all the attendant publicity around it might be reinforcing the impression that a lot of recreational players have, which is that everybody's cheating. And that's clearly not the case. And I think that's a message we want to try and express as well. It's not the case that everybody's cheating. It's not even the case that everybody at high stakes is cheating. But we definitely do want to do everything we can to catch cheats. Now, I've been sponsored by a few online sites, and I've spoken to the people who are charged with catching cheats. And these are very smart people. Most cheats, I believe, are actually caught, but it's not publicized, because it's not really in the interest of anybody to say, oh, we've caught all these cheats, and because then everybody goes, okay, so they're all cheating. But the sites do try very difficult, at least the major regulated sites. About some of the sites who are less regulated, and in particular the apps who are largely unregulated. Now, some of the apps are obviously more trustworthy than others, and some of them are actually regulated, but a lot of them are operating in a gray space where they're pretending that they're playing for play money, but really they're using a system of agents, and it is actually for real money. But because the whole thing is unofficial and money's being transferred around on just somebody saying, okay, well, your bunch of players lost 10,000 to my bunch of players, so send me $10,000 and I'll distribute it to my players. That's a disaster waiting to happen, and there's no real legal protection there for the players. So and also then in response to whether it's high stakes or not, to be honest, I don't think it's confined to high stakes. I think the rewards are the greatest at the high stakes. And I don't think the rewards are sufficient for one person on their own to decide it's worth investing in RTA and all the other things you can use to cheat at low stakes or even mid stakes. But it could be more than worthwhile for somebody to put together a stable of 100 players and provide them all with RTA and get them all to collude and all the other ways you can cheat. And the rewards will then flow upwards to whoever has the stable. So I think stables are a sort of murky area in poker as well. Now, obviously, most stables are perfectly trustworthy, but it is the sort of area that if you were looking to cheat at lower stakes, that's pretty much how you would do it.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting. It's something I think we've talked about quite a lot anyways, and more specifically in high rollers, because so few players have, or higher buy-in events, because so few players have most of their own action, and the fields are small enough that you can see how decisions could be made when they are also considering the implications of other players at the table who also they have pieces of. And I think we have talked about this, and I mean, as a poker community, and generally come to the sense that we've self-policed or whatever it is. And I'm curious for, I don't want to like derail too far off something else, but I'm interested to hear, as someone who came into poker at 42 years old, what is the thing that captured your attention, or what is the thing that made you say like, okay, this feels safe. This feels good to me.
Well, my main motivation when I came in was I've always done something competitive in my life. So as a young adult, I played chess at a pretty high level. Then I played bridge at a pretty high level, and then I went into running and did that at a very high level. And at the age I started poker, my running career was starting to phase out because of my age. But I was already thinking of, well, what else can I do? And I did see poker on TV one night, and saw people of all ages and shapes and sizes competing apparently equally. So it occurred to me, okay, well, this is definitely something where my age is not going to be a factor, or at least as much of a factor as in something physical like running. And given that I had already had a background in games, and I loved playing games all my life since I was a small child, it just seemed like this is a natural thing for me to do. And at the time, when the poker boom was really hitting full force, so it was also something you could actually make your living from. Now, to be honest, I never really imagined I would make my living from it. I thought, well, if I do this for a few years and I work at it really hard, maybe I'll reach the stage where I can start competing against the professionals, and that'll give me a buzz. I never expected it to become the job, but I started really, really well. I obviously ran very well at the start of my career, and within a few months, I was making more money online than I was from my job. So it just became kind of natural that became the job. By the end of the first year I was playing, and yeah, everything pretty much just happened much faster. But it was, I mean, when I think back, it's quite funny, because I remember saying to my wife, this is a good thing for me to do, because at the time I was a IT consultant, which involved working at my computer for very long hours and traveling around the world a lot. And I thought to her, well, this is good. I'll get to spend less time at my computer and I won't have to travel as much. Now that really didn't work out. But in the meantime, I'd obviously fallen in love with the game. So that's what, yeah, I guess I came for the won't be at the computer and won't be traveling, and stayed for just the pure love of the game.
That makes sense. And I think there are quite a few people I know that have come from the bridge chess background. So there's clearly a lot of a lot of overlap there. I think if you love those games, it's pretty easy to jump into poker and see why poker is so great. But I think, it's interesting also that a lot of people choose to pursue and play poker, both professionally or recreationally, but not so many people, I think, ever make the transition to coaching. And I'm curious to hear what sort of inspired that for you, and and how you sort of approach it. I think my husband, who was an athlete, people used to always say, why don't you open a gym? Why don't you, become a coach or a trainer? And he always said, being good at something does not make you good at teaching it. It's a very different thing, but clearly something that you've managed to figure out on both sides.
Yeah, the coaching thing also kind of really happened by accident. It essentially grew out of staking that I was doing. I was staking a bunch of players, about 8 players, with 2 of my friends, David Lappin and Dara Davey. And we were pretty clueless about how staking even worked when we started. We just thought, okay, we give these guys money, they make money, they give us some of that money back, and it's pretty easy. And then we realized, okay, well, they actually have to be winning players. And we thought, well, this is pretty easy. We're all winning players. So what we'll do is we'll just get them in. We'll tell them everything we know, and then they'll be winning players too. And again, not that simple. Didn't really work out like that. So we ended up having to do regular coaching with these guys. And we used to have coaching sessions where the 3 of us would be on a call and we'd be going through their hand history. And we'd all give our thoughts. And to be honest, I think I was by far the worst of the 3 coaches. I think I really, really sucked at the start. I just, they would ask a spot, and David would have a very clear opinion and very clear reasons why he thought you should do something in a spot. And then Dara would have his opinion. And then they'd ask me, and my answer, it was a running joke among our group that my answer was always, well, it depends. Which is probably true in poker, but not particularly useful when you're trying to teach somebody. What happened, I think, which changed things, is when the solvers arrived, I was one of the first people to really work hard with the solvers. Because of my software background, I was sort of naturally suited to working with a computer, programming inputs and interpreting output. And I think I was very, very good at it. So what tended to happen with our coaching sessions was, rather than just the 3 of us giving our opinion and mine being the most worthless, they would give their opinions, and I would go, actually, guys, you're completely wrong. I just ran it to the solver, and the solver said, this is the answer. And that's essentially still my approach to coaching today. I work very heavily with solvers. I coach players who play games that I don't. I coach some cash game players. I'm not a cash player. But what I can do is they can tell me, this is what I want you to look at. These are the sort of ranges that I'm playing against in my game. These are the sort of sizes that we use. Now run a lot of spots, and I want you to analyze the data for me. And I think I'm very good at looking at a lot of solutions and picking out the patterns, picking out the heuristics, and saying, okay, well, on these types of boards, we do a lot of check raising, and I think this is the reason. And on these types of boards, we do a lot of leading, and I think this is the reason, et cetera, et cetera. And these are the heuristics that people can use in game. So I think I started out as the world's worst coach. I became better, but purely as a result of being able to use solvers.
So that's interesting, because some of the other people that I know that have stables, if you will, or people that they back, it seems like a natural progression that almost always then sort of is the next thing, is they realize, okay, I also need to impart a lot of information that I've gained over the years into these players' minds if I want them to be successful. And I think this is something else that's kind of timely and relevant to ask and discuss, is how much input do you share with your either stable, if you still do have one, or just people that you coach, about things that extend outside of poker? Do you talk about lifestyle things ever? Do you talk about sleep, meditation, things that you've also, I assume, probably figured out that help your game better? How much do you make that a part of your coaching?
Yeah, that's become a much bigger part, and it's something which I never really expected, to be honest. I think because of my background in various competitive games and also in sports, I just naturally have sort of a good, strong mindset for poker. And it's something I always just kind of took for granted. And dealing with other players, I realized that not everybody has that. And sometimes people have major flaws in the way they think, or the way they approach, or the way they react to adversity. And over time, as I worked with players, I found that that's actually one of the areas where I could provide a lot more value. Stuff like how to just how to live your life away from the table, how to organize your study, how to organize your play, how to approach a big final table, how to make sure that you go in with the right mindset, how to make sure that if something bad happens on that final table, you won't go to pieces. You'll know how to react, etc., etc. So I think I built up a lot of expertise in that area. And now when I coach, I still coach a lot of top tournament players, and that's really where the value comes from. You know, I've taught them all I can know about solvers. I've given them all the major heuristics, but if they make a final table, they still invariably come back to me and say, okay, can you help me get ready for the final table tomorrow? And some of that is running the solves and talking them through what their strategy is going to be at the start. But some of them is also just preparing them mentally, getting them to imagine, okay, what happens if you go in and you get a really bad beat in the first orbit and now you're short stacked? How are you going to react to that? What happens if you're card dead for a long period? Are you going to be able to just stay disciplined and not do anything crazy just because you're bored and frustrated that you're card dead? And there's a kind of a checklist I can go through now from my own experience of what I do. And then obviously I do have some expertise in how to keep fit, and like I still run, and I've actually started coaching some top class players now on running. Last year I coached Daniel Negreanu to run his first ultra marathon. It's an area where I think people are getting more interested, realizing that if you know, healthy body, healthy mind, and other stuff like meditation. I think I'm really bad at meditation, but I think almost everybody is really bad at meditation. But you can sort of steer people in the right direction and tell them what the benefits are, when you should do it, and just generally how to approach it.
Well, something else that I think a lot of people are notoriously bad at that apparently you are very good at. In my just cursory glancing around and everything this morning, I heard you several times, and I believe there's a book which directly addresses the concept of ICM. I can't tell you how many times at poker tournaments this term is thrown around loosely here and there. I think some people have a much better grasp on what this means and what it is than others. And having a book on the subject sounds amazing. Please discuss. You're muted. Sorry, we missed that whole little sector. He's just like me. I do the same thing. Everyone knows.
We were joking about the mute on mute. Yeah, I did it again. Okay, I'll do a Phil Hellmuth and I'll just hold up the book instead and say nothing. But we a few years ago I did a book on satellites with Barry and Carter, and it was really meant to be just a one-off. Barry had written a piece on books that have never been written in poker but should be, and his main one was on satellites. And then he thought after a couple of years, well, maybe I should actually be proactive about this and try and find somebody to write the book. And at the time I was regarded as one of the best satellite players, so he came to me with the idea. So we did the book. It was very successful, very enjoyable experience, so much so that I thought, okay, well, we'll want to do another one. So we wrote another book on PKOs, and then when it came for the third book, we thought, well, what else could we write about? And ICM was always very interesting to me because that was something which I had studied quite a lot at the start of my career, back when I was playing sit and goes. And at the time, the sort of natural progression for players like me was you started playing sit and goes and you grinded thousands and thousands and thousands of sit and goes. And then if you went into MTTs at a later stage, you had that sort of ICM base that you learned from sit and goes. Essentially, sit and goes are like final table simulation emulators. And if you played tens of thousands of them, it's the same as having made tens of thousands of final tables. Now, it's kind of reached the point where maybe about 10 years ago, sit and goes kind of died out. So players who came into the game after that, they were coming from a different place. They went straight into MTTs and they learned all the skills that you need in MTTs, but they tended not to be very good at ICM, because the only time ICM really became significant was when they made a final table. And if they made 20 final tables a year, that they were only getting to practice once every couple of weeks. So it became a major area where people just weren't very good. And then the solvers came along, but the solvers weren't really ICM aware, at least not post-flop. So people were studying other stuff because it was possible to get exact information from the solvers, but not studying ICM. So ICM sort of receded into the background. But in terms of, if you're a tournament player, the one single thing which will make the biggest difference to your win rate is how well you do at the end of tournaments when ICM is a factor, how well you do around bubbles when ICM is a factor. And if you can make even minor improvements in that area, it'll make a massive difference to your win rate. So we thought, okay, well, there's almost no content out there on ICM, and it is something which is actually going to make a lot of difference to people. By now, we'd realized that most of our market was sort of what I call smart recreational players who want to put a bit of work in and study and hope to reap the rewards as a result. And this was the one thing we thought, well, if we teach them about this stuff, it will make a really massive difference to how they do. So that was where the idea came from. Now, around the same time, the post-flop solvers like PO were actually becoming ICM aware. So I was starting to run ICM simulations and found that probably 90% of what I thought about post-flop, which was really just guesswork, was correct, but there was 10% which was wildly different and really surprising to me. So I thought the time was right to basically sort of do a deep dive into post-flop ICM and report back the major results. And that's the purpose of the book.
Wow, that's fascinating. Clearly I need to read the book, by the way. And can you, just since we were muted, drop again what's the name and where people can get it?
Sure, yeah. The book is called, well, we come up with the most boring titles because Barry is SEO obsessed. So we have to put poker strategy into every single title. So the first book was Satellite Poker Strategy. The second title was PKO Poker Strategy, or Poker. Sorry, the first one was Poker Satellite Strategy. The second one was PKO Poker Strategy. I think he rearranges the words just to really confuse me. So this one we called it Endgame Poker Strategy, the ICM book. Again, so that just if people search for poker strategy, it'll pop up. It's available on Amazon and various other places like iTunes, and there's some weird ones as well. I don't even know what they are, but he talks about them like Nobu and
you're like, whatever, just Google it. It's fine. It's SEO friendly. So
if you Google it, you'll find it.
Yeah. Which, okay, so I'm kind of curious, and this like might be semi left field, but as someone who's very clearly deeply entrenched in data and as an analyst yourself, Andrew Moreno, recently he posted something, I want to say like 2 or 3 months ago, where he had been very deep in a tournament. I think this was maybe the Win, maybe Venetians, I can't remember exactly, but basically he had been offered a deal in a spot where he had less chips, right, than his opponent. And the opponent offered him a deal which he actually would have gotten the lion's share of the money, even though he had less chips. And Andrew still did not want to take a deal. And he sort of went through and explained that part of the reason he didn't want to take a deal, or that he usually doesn't take deals, is that he feels like most poker players are extremely inexperienced in final tables and in these end game moments of having to make these huge decisions with all the pressure and all the ICM implications. And that he feels like every time you take a deal and stop sweating these big moments, you also are losing out on the EV of knowing and understanding how to effectively play these moments. And so he thinks also maybe in some ways his edge is bigger because he never does, and that it continues to get bigger because he never does. Do you think there's some value in that?
Yeah, I think there's definitely something to that. I mean, back when we all played sit and goes, nobody ever dealt in a 10-man sit and go. That just made absolutely no sense. So there were no deals, and because of that, we got all the practice. I think. And again, going back to what tournament players are good at and what they don't get much practice in, one thing tournament players really don't get much practice in is playing shorthanded. Because if you enter a tournament and there's 9 or 10 players at your table, and that number is going to stay right till the end until you get down to the second last table, and suddenly you're going to find you're at a table with only 8 players, and then 7 players, and then 6 players, and then 5, and then 4, and then 3, and then if you get far enough, you're going to have to play heads up. And this is something that tournament players really just don't practice very much. And a lot of the edge comes from just knowing how you have to adjust your game in those spots. And then when you add in the ICM dimension, that creates another dimension completely. And like, as I said, if even online players who do high volume, they might only make 20 final tables in a year. And that's not a huge amount of practice. And if they're going to make deals in a lot of those tournaments, then that reduces the amount of practice even more. So they end up with almost no practice of playing at the business end of tournaments. we talked about this fairly extensively in the book because there are other good reasons to agree to deals. It could be the spot that if you make one big final table in a year and you come sixth, you're going to have a losing year overall. But if you come first, you're going to have a massive winning year. But if you do a deal with six left, you bank a fairly big winning year as well. So there's kind of variance reduction arguments for doing deals too. And a lot of the top class players will tell you it depends on the final table. But if you got to the World Series main event final table, for example, I think a lot of the best players would say that even if you thought you were by far the best player with 5 people left, if the other 4 guys wanted to deal, you should do a deal, because this is probably the only time in your life you're going to be in this spot. And the difference, if you can lock up 5 million in a deal, the difference between that 5 million and the 2 million you're going to get if you bust out in fifth is more significant to your life than the difference between that 5 million and if you actually go on to win it. So there are definitely arguments plus and for and against, but the main argument for never dealing is exactly the argument that you said there. It just gives you more chances to practice the skills of actually trying to close out a tournament.
You guys know this muting game is like really strong over here. Yeah, that's interesting. I thought it was a really interesting take on things. But then of course, many other players had many strong responses, and, it's all about the money. But really it's interesting because the money also is so directly correlated to experience and practice and whatever. So I thought that was a very interesting overall take on things. And I am super excited to read your ICM book. I think this is something that would be very helpful for me also to understand, in that mostly I cover live poker tournaments and people throw these terms around, I think, very regularly, and could make a lot of my conversations more interesting. Okay, so let's talk a little bit briefly. We talked about returning to live poker. You just spent the last week crushing at the Irish Poker Open. You were commentating, you were playing. You guys still managed to squeeze a podcast in, I think, there at the very end. We've got the World Series rearing its ugly head right around the corner. I know also you mentioned you have a wife. So what are your plans for the next upcoming events? Are you going to be in Monte Carlo? Can we expect to see you at the WSOP? What's next on the radar?
There's a lot of live poker in Ireland between now and the WSOP, one of which is sponsored by Unibet, my main sponsors, the Dublin Poker Festival. And that actually has a place dear in my heart, because the very first major live tournament I played back in my first year was a thing called the European Deep Stack. It was the very first running of it, and I ended up winning it. So that was sort of when I arrived on the scene. And I've actually final tabled that tournament twice since as well. So it's a tournament which I've tended to do very well in, even right from the start. And I love it because of that. And the fact that Unibet are sponsoring it now makes it all the sweeter. So because that clashes with Monte Carlo, I won't be going to Monte Carlo. I'll be playing the Dublin Poker Festival instead. And then there are some other events in Dublin during May, like UK IPT Dublin, for example, which I'm also looking forward to. And then we'll be into Vegas. I have sort of run around like a blue bottle fly the last few months, trying to play as much live poker as I can. When my wife is definitely losing patience now with the amount of time I've been out of the house. She actually loved the pandemic because basically I was stuck here, and there was absolutely no imperative on me to leave. But I am planning 4 weeks in Vegas for the end. I'll arrive just in time to play the seniors, and then I'll stay till the end. But I'll probably try to take some time between the middle of May, when the live stuff in Dublin falls off, and 1 month later going to Vegas to chill maybe and spend some time with her. Maybe bring her somewhere if I can coax her out of the house, because she's really loved the pandemic so much. I think she just likes the idea of we stay in our own house now, and we can talk to people by Zoom, or we can watch Netflix, and that's what we do now. And then immediately after Vegas, the Unibet Open is coming back. They're having their first stop in 2 years in Malta, and Malta is always a great place to play poker. So I'm very much looking forward to that as well.
I'm a huge Malta fan also. And actually in terms of all the stops I've ever had the privilege of getting to check out, Ireland is a stop I have never done. There have been tons that PokerNews was covering, different little snippets here and there, and I've never managed to go, but it always seems to be one of the places where everyone really has a great time. I think maybe traditionally the Irish are good at both having fun and also playing poker, which is not always the combo. And who are your teammates, by the way, on Unibet? Who are the people that flush out the sort of ambassadors or the team members on Unibet?
Yeah, we recently lost my good friend Ian Simpson, which we were very sad about because Ian was involved in our podcast at Chip Race too. He was a pretty bad newsman, it has to be said, but you know, he did his best. He sort of, well, actually, no, he didn't even do his best, but at least he generally showed up and just said something about the news. And we've replaced him with Barry Carter, the guy that I do the books with. Barry's doing a much, much better job than Ian, it has to be said. So even though I kind of miss Ian personally, because he's a lovely lad, maybe I don't miss him as professionally as much. To answer your question, it's basically myself and David now, and a very nice Canadian, Canadian, where did that come from? Norwegian lady called Monica Waka, who she was here recently for the Norwegian Championships, which for some reason are held in Ireland every year, despite being the Norwegians, just before the Irish Open. And she's, to my mind, the model ambassador. She just, she always has time for everybody. She interacts really, really well with everybody. She's incredibly friendly at the table. She's also incredibly good at poker. She plays all of the games, unlike myself and David, who are just holding monkeys and barely know the rules of the other games. And it's basically the three of us. The Unibet online series is running at the moment, and we are the three faces on the poster. There are some other local ambassadors for their markets, like Alex Riar, for example, who's an absolute French sicko, but wouldn't be too well known outside of France. But that's pretty much it these days for Unibet. We used to have a ridiculous amount of ambassadors for the size of the site, and it's been slimmed down to pretty much that team now.
Hey, listen, it's all about quality these days. Well, do please send me Monica's info. I would love to just interview her. I'm always interested in new faces that I don't know. And I especially love the gals who can play all the mixed games. They're a rare breed. Okay, well, anything else before I let you go? Let me know, like, what if you have anything big next on the docket? Are you working on a new book? Are you where should I send people? Your last blog I did actually read. I thought it was very interesting, the whole shingles thing. If you guys haven't checked out his blog, please do. It's always candid, which is my favorite thing.
Yeah, I spared people the shingles pictures from the shingles episode, and that's probably the best thing. But myself and Barry are working on another book at the moment. We also produced a course on satellites with Ryan LaPlante for Learn Pro Poker, and we're working on an ICM course with him as well. And we are working on other bits and pieces. We're working on the fourth book. We're also working on something on mystery bounties, which seem to be taking the world by storm. Initially, I didn't think there was going to be too much to mystery bounties from a strategy point of view. It seemed like you were just adding a lottery element to poker, but actually there is quite a bit of strategy to think about, and we are sort of unpacking that at the moment, working out the maths, and then working out what the strategic adjustments people should be making in mystery bounties. I think that particular format is going to really catch on. You're already seeing people really love them live. They're starting to appear online as well now. So we would probably like to be the first people to market with something on mystery bounties.
Well, let me know if and when it happens. If you want to come on and just talk about it, I would love to tell that story as well. And I love Ryan. He's definitely a friend also. So where can people find you on the interwebs if they would like to just follow or stalk?
Probably the best central place is just to follow me on Twitter. That's where I tend to put out all the stuff that I produce. Produce a lot of strategy content, some with Barry, some on my own. When the podcast goes out, I alert people there. That's kind of the central point, I guess. I have my own blog too, but every time I blog, I send out the link from Twitter. I also write for Vegas Slots Online these days, following David Lappin to writing for that site. But as I said, if you follow me on Twitter, I will spam you remorselessly on absolutely everything that I put out.
That's what Twitter's all about, though. That's the whole way, and I think, it's so funny because am also in a few different other industries. I do some other things periodically, and it seems to be Twitter is a space for poker, but not a space for lots of other things. We are a very information centric niche, and Twitter works for us where it just doesn't work for a lot of other people. I really appreciate you coming on. I know that you're very busy and you have tons of stuff taking your attention away, and I just appreciate you taking the time to share with us. And yeah, I was really pleasantly surprised. Also, I never know where the conversation is going to take us, but this was a direction I didn't expect, and I learned a lot about you that I'm sure you get this a lot, where people just have one idea of you and it's a completely different version. You are very sassy online. You are, a very accomplished poker player, but I would have never guessed that you were like a solver guy, that you're like a GTO solver guy. That wouldn't have been where I thought it was going, but here we are.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that, Sarah. And I'm very much hoping to see you at the WSOP. You really missed you last year, and my mind, going to the WSOP, you're central to it. You running around with your microphone, interviewing everybody, always looking fabulous, always so friendly. Hopefully we'll see you
running
back
around with a microphone is like the quintessential sense. This is what my vibe at WSOP is, and yes, I will definitely be there this year, if for the main event, if nothing else.
Brilliant, great stuff.
Cheers.
Thanks a lot, Sarah.